struggling mom, let a strange man stay for the night. She had no idea he was the new CEO of her company. The rain pounded Seattle's streets, a relentless curtain of water blurring the neon lights of the city. Emma Blake, 29, trudged through the downpour, her blonde hair plastered to her face under the hood of her worn jacket. Her janitor's uniform from Innovatech, the tech giant where she worked the night shift, clung to her thin frame, soaked through. Her boots splashed in puddles, each step a reminder of the 12-hour shift she'd just endured. Despite the exhaustion carving lines into her face, her green eyes held a quiet strength, the kind forged by years of raising her 5-year-old son, Noah, alone. The wind howled, biting at her exposed hands, but she pressed on toward the tiny apartment she called home, a mile away from the gleaming Innovatech tower. Halfway down a deserted street, Emma's gaze caught on a figure hunched under a flickering streetlight's awning. A man, maybe mid-30s, stood shivering, his dark hair dripping, his expensive-looking coat sodden and useless against the storm. He clutched his arms, his face pale, eyes scanning the empty road as if waiting for salvation that wasn't coming. Emma slowed, her heart tugging. She'd seen too many people like this in Seattle, lost, broken, left to the mercy of the night, but something about his posture, the way his shoulders slumped yet held a trace of pride, made her pause. "You okay?" she called, raising her voice over the rain's roar. "It's freezing out here." The man's head snapped up, his eyes, hazel, sharp despite his weariness, meeting hers. His voice came out rough, like gravel. "I lost everything. Wallet, phone, all gone. Just need a place to crash for the night." Emma's stomach tightened. Letting a stranger into her home with Noah sleeping there was reckless. She'd learned to trust her instincts after her husband Mark died in that innovative accident 3 years ago, leaving her to fight a soulless corporation for the insurance money they owed. But this man's eyes, raw and unguarded, stirred something in her. She shifted her weight, rain dripping from her hood. "My place is small, but it's close. You can stay one night." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I won't be trouble." Emma led the way, her sneakers squelching on the pavement. The man followed, silent, his steps uneven as if the cold had seeped into his bones. Her apartment was a cramped one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a rundown building, the kind where the elevator never worked. She unlocked the door, the faint smell of instant noodles and laundry detergent greeting them. Noah's crayons and drawings littered the coffee table, a splash of color in the dim space. The man, Daniel, he'd said his name was, stood awkwardly by the door, water pooling at his feet. "Sit there," Emma said, pointing to the sagging sofa. She tossed him a faded quilt, one of Noah's favorites, patched from years of use. "I'll get you some water." "I'm fine," Daniel said, his voice softer now, almost embarrassed. "Just, this is enough." He took the quilt, his fingers brushing the fabric with care, and settled into the corner of the sofa, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Emma watched him from the kitchenette, heating a mug of water on the stove. He refused the offer of food, only accepting the steaming mug, which he cradled like it was the only warmth left in the world. As she turned off the kitchen light, Daniel folded the quilt neatly, placing it beside him with a precision that felt out of place for someone who looked so lost. The gesture, small but deliberate, made Emma pause. She didn't know this man, didn't know he was Daniel King, the new CEO of Innovatech, the company she was suing for her husband's death. All she saw was a stranger, shivering and grateful, now asleep on her sofa. Her heart wavered between caution and curiosity as she tiptoed to check on Noah, unaware that this night would change everything. Morning light slipped through the cracked blinds of Emma Blake's small Seattle apartment, casting faint stripes across the worn linoleum floor. The scent of rain lingered, mixing with the aroma of instant noodles simmering on the stove. Emma, her blonde hair in a messy ponytail, moved swiftly in the cramped kitchenette. Her janitor's uniform hung over a chair, a reminder of her grueling night shift at Innovatech. Her green eyes, tired but fierce, focused on preparing breakfast for Noah, who sat at the table, his dark curls bouncing as he colored a rocket ship, tongue poking out in concentration. Daniel King, the stranger from last night's storm, stirred on the sofa, the quilt Emma gave him folded neatly beside him. His dark hair was messy, his once fine coat crumpled but dry. He seemed out of place in the modest space, yet his hazel eyes held quiet gratitude as he watched Emma work. Noah looked up, curious. "Are you Mom's friend?" he asked, his voice bright with innocence. Emma paused, spoon hovering over the pot, and forced a smile. "He's just someone who needed help, Noah." She glanced at Daniel, who nodded slightly, signaling he wouldn't overstep. "I'm Daniel," he said to Noah, his voice warm. "Nice rocket ship. You like building things?" Noah grinned, showing his drawing. Emma watched, her guard softening at her son's joy. As she served noodles and stale bread, Emma spoke, her words unexpected. "It's just us now," she said, voice steady but pained. "My husband, Mark, was an IT engineer at Innovatech. 3 years ago, an accident at their server facility took him. The company promised insurance, but keeps dodging payment. I'm fighting them in court while working nights cleaning their offices to keep us going." Her knuckles whitened around the spoon. Daniel listened, his expression calm but eyes heavy. "That's unfair," he said softly. "I'm sorry," he paused, then added, "I'm an IT guy myself. Lost my job, then my wallet and phone last night. Bad luck." The lie shielded his true role as Innovatech's new CEO, a secret he kept to protect his plans to fix the company. Noah, unaware of the tension, tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Can you make a paper airplane?" he asked, eyes wide. Daniel chuckled, taking a sheet of Noah's paper and folding a sleek airplane that glided across the room. Noah squealed, chasing it, and Emma's lips curved into a reluctant smile, warmed by her son's happiness. As morning passed, Daniel prepared to leave, thanking Emma quietly. She handed him a spare umbrella, their fingers brushing briefly. "Be careful," she said, her voice softer. Daniel nodded, stepping toward the door. Before leaving, he bent down, pretending to tie his shoe, and slipped a folded $50 bill under the faded welcome mat with a note. "Thank you for giving me a place to stay." Emma found the money and note later while sweeping, her breath catching. The small, deliberate gesture pierced her guarded heart. She clutched the note, torn between gratitude and unease. Who was this man, and why did he care? Daniel, walking into the rain-soaked streets, glanced back at the apartment, silently promising to return and thank her properly. Emma tucked the money into a jar labeled Noah's School Fund, her thoughts lingering on the stranger who'd marked her morning, unaware he held the power to change her life. Daniel King stepped into the sleek lobby of the Westin Hotel in downtown Seattle, his damp coat a stark contrast to the polished marble and glittering chandeliers. At 36, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd once commanded boardrooms, but today his hazel eyes were shadowed with unease. The concierge nodded discreetly, unaware that Daniel was the anonymous investor who'd just acquired Innovatech, the tech giant across town. 5 years ago, a trusted partner's betrayal had tanked his real estate empire, teaching him to guard his identity like a fortress. Now, as he prepared to overhaul Innovatech, he couldn't afford to let the media or opportunistic employees know who he was. Not yet. In his suite, Daniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's rain-slick skyline blurring before him. His mind wasn't on the upcoming board meeting or the stacks of financial reports on his desk. It was on Emma Blake, the blonde woman who'd opened her home to him last night, and her son Noah, whose laughter had stirred something dormant in his chest. Her story about Innovatech's refusal to pay her late husband's insurance gnawed at him. He'd bought the company to rebuild it, but Emma's pain made him question what kind of legacy he was inheriting. Daniel's phone buzzed, a text from his lawyer, urging him to stay under the radar until the restructuring plan was finalized. The pressure to remain invisible weighed heavy. If the press caught wind of his identity, they'd dig up his past failure. If employees knew, They'd curry favor or sabotage his reforms. But Emma's face, weary yet defiant, kept surfacing in his thoughts. He couldn't shake the guilt that Innovatech, now his responsibility, had failed her. That afternoon, needing air, Daniel wandered to a nearby supermarket, his casual jeans and hoodie blending him into the crowd. As he rounded an aisle, he froze. There was Emma, her blonde ponytail swaying as she scanned discount labels on canned soup, Noah trailing behind her with a small basket. Her worn jacket hung loose on her thin frame, and she hesitated before placing a can back on the shelf, her lips moving as if calculating her budget. Noah tugged her sleeve, pointing at a box of cereal, but she shook her head gently. Daniel approached, his heart pounding. "Hey, fancy running into you here," he said, his tone light, as if they were old acquaintances. Emma looked up, startled, her green eyes narrowing before softening in recognition. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" Noah grinned, waving. "Hi, Uncle Daniel. Just grabbing some groceries," Daniel lied smoothly, gesturing to his empty hands. "How about you two? Ice cream sound good?" Emma hesitated, but Noah's excited bounce won her over. They sat at a small cafe table outside the store, Noah happily licking a chocolate cone while Emma sipped a coffee, her guarded smile betraying a flicker of warmth. As Noah chattered about school, Daniel noticed the boy's worn sneakers, one lace frayed. "Ever made a paper boat?" he asked, grabbing a napkin. With quick, practiced folds, he crafted a tiny boat, sliding it across the table to Noah, who squealed and pretended it sailed on an imaginary sea. Emma watched, her expression softening, surprised by Daniel's patience. "You're good with kids," she said quietly, almost to herself. When Emma stepped away to take a call from her lawyer, Daniel seized the moment. He slipped to the cashier, paying for her small basket of groceries before she returned. The cashier handed him the receipt, which he tucked away, ensuring Emma wouldn't notice until later. "Don't tell her," he murmured to the cashier, who nodded with a knowing smile. Back at his hotel, Daniel opened his laptop, pulling up Innovatech's internal records. He typed Mark Blake into the database, his jaw tightening as he read about the accident, a faulty server room panel, ignored safety reports, and a stalled insurance claim. The weight of Emma's struggle settled deeper. He wasn't just a stranger who'd slept on her couch. He was now the man responsible for righting Innovatech's wrongs. Closing his laptop, Daniel resolved to dig deeper, determined to fix what the company had broken, starting with the woman whose kindness had already begun to chip away at his guarded heart. The Seattle dusk painted the sky in shades of gray as Daniel King approached Emma Blake's apartment building, a pizza box balanced in one hand and a small plastic dinosaur tucked in his pocket. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd found himself drawn back to this run-down corner of the city, his polished shoes out of place on the cracked sidewalk. At 36, Daniel was used to boardrooms and penthouses, but the warmth of Emma's cramped apartment lingered in his mind, pulling him back like a tide. Tonight, he told himself it was just to repay her kindness, but his quickening pulse betrayed a deeper truth. Emma answered the door, her blonde hair loose, framing her tired but striking face. Her green eyes widened at the sight of the pizza. "Daniel, you didn't have to," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Noah, her 5-year-old son, bounced from the couch, his dark curls wild. "Uncle Daniel!" he shouted, wrapping his small arms around Daniel's leg. The nickname, borrowed from Emma's Vietnamese neighbor, made Daniel's chest tighten with an unfamiliar warmth. Inside, the apartment smelled of laundry detergent and the faint tang of instant coffee. Emma set out mismatched plates, her movements quick but graceful, a remnant of a life before endless night shifts at Innovatech. As they ate, Noah chattered about dinosaurs, and Daniel pulled out the toy from his pocket, handing it to the boy. Noah's eyes lit up, and he clutched the plastic T-Rex like a treasure. He accepted. Emma watched, her lips curving into a soft smile, though her gaze held a flicker of caution. After dinner, Noah tugged Daniel to his tiny corner of the room, where a flickering lamp cast shadows on a pile of drawings. Emma joined them, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "He loves that lamp," she said, her voice low. "It was Mark's. It's been broken for months, but I can't afford to fix it." Her words carried a weight beyond the lamp, and Daniel's heart sank, knowing Innovatech's role in her struggles. He still hadn't told her he was the company's new CEO, the secret a heavy stone in his chest. "Mind if I take a look?" Daniel asked, picking up the lamp. Noah watched, fascinated, as Daniel opened the base, his nimble fingers tracing wires with the ease of someone who'd once tinkered with tech in his early career. Within minutes, the lamp glowed steadily again. Daniel pulled a pocket knife from his jeans and carefully carved a small star into the wooden base, adding the words, "For Noah's Dreams," in tiny, precise letters. Noah clapped, and Emma's breath caught, her eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Later, as Noah played with his dinosaur, Emma and Daniel sat at the table, coffee mugs between them. "I'm scared, Daniel," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I lose this lawsuit against Innovatech, I could lose Noah. They've got lawyers I can't compete with, and I'm just... me." Her fingers trembled around her mug, and Daniel fought the urge to reach for her hand. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he was working to fix the company's wrongs, but the risk of exposing his identity too soon held him back. Instead, he said, "You're stronger than you think, Emma. You're fighting for Noah. That's more than most people could do." As he left that night, Daniel glanced back at the apartment, the soft glow of Noah's lamp visible through the window. His heart ached, with a feeling he hadn't known in years, something dangerously close to love. But the weight of his secret pressed harder. Emma's trust, so hard-won, could shatter when she learned who he was. Walking into the chilly night, Daniel resolved to dig deeper into Innovatech's past, determined to make things right for Emma and Noah, even if it meant risking the carefully guarded life he'd built. The star on Noah's lamp, a small act of care, was just the beginning. The Innovatech conference room buzzed with anticipation, a sea of employees in crisp shirts and lanyards filling the sleek, glass-walled space. Emma Blake, 29, stood at the back, her blonde hair tucked under a cap, her janitor's uniform setting her apart from the crowd. Her green eyes, usually sharp with resolve, were dulled by exhaustion after another night shift. She leaned against her cleaning cart, blending into the shadows, her mind half on Noah, her 5-year-old son, and half on the company's announcement of its new CEO. Innovatech had been her battleground for 3 years, ever since her husband Mark's death in their server room accident. The lawsuit she'd filed for his insurance money was draining her, and today's meeting felt like another reminder of her fight against a faceless corporation. The room quieted as a man stepped onto the stage, his presence commanding despite his unassuming navy suit. Emma's breath caught, her heart lurching as she recognized the sharp jawline, the hazel eyes that had softened when he'd fixed Noah's lamp. Daniel King, the stranger she'd let into her home, the man who'd played with her son and left money under her mat, stood before the microphone. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I'm Daniel King, your new CEO. I'm here to rebuild Innovatech, to make it a company that values its people." The room erupted in applause, but Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her hands gripped the cart, knuckles white, as Daniel's words echoed in her head. CEO. The man she'd trusted, who'd sat at her table, was the head of the company she despised. Her mind raced, piecing together his lies. He'd said he was an unemployed IT worker, not the multi-millionaire who'd bought Innovatech to save it from collapse. Had he known about her lawsuit? Was his kindness a ploy to manipulate her, to weaken her case? The betrayal stung, sharp and raw, cutting through the warmth she'd felt for him. She saw his eyes scan the crowd, pausing as they found her. His expression faltered, a flicker of panic crossing his face. But Emma couldn't bear it. Tears burned her eyes as she turned, pushing her cart toward the exit, the murmurs of the crowd fading behind her. "Emma!" Daniel's voice called, sharp over the microphone, but she didn't stop. The double doors swung shut, muffling the applause. She stumbled into the hallway, her breath hitching, tears spilling down her cheeks. How could she have been so naive? She'd let him into her home, her life, believing he was just a kind stranger. Now he was the face of everything she was fighting against. Daniel, still on the stage, felt his chest tighten as Emma vanished. He'd wanted to tell her the truth, but the fear of losing her trust, of jeopardizing that fragile connection, had kept him silent. He fumbled through the rest of his speech, his mind elsewhere. As the meeting ended, he slipped to the back of the room, where Emma's cart had stood. He pulled a pen from his pocket and scrawled on a scrap of paper. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth, but I'll make things right." He tucked it into the corner of the cart's handle, hoping she'd find it, a quiet gesture born of desperation, to reach her. Emma walked home through the Seattle drizzle, her heart a tangle of hurt and confusion. She entered her small apartment, where Noah was sprawled on the floor, coloring. He looked up, his dark curls bouncing. "Mom, where's Uncle Daniel?" The question broke her. She sank to the floor, pulling Noah into her arms, tears falling as she held him tight. She was furious at Daniel, at his deception, but beneath the anger, a stubborn warmth lingered, the memory of his laughter with Noah, the star he'd carved for her son's dreams. She hated that she still cared, that his kindness had rooted itself in her heart. As Noah hugged her back, unaware of her turmoil, Emma braced herself for the fight ahead, unsure if she could ever face the man who'd become both her savior and her betrayer. Daniel King stood at the podium in Innovatech's sleek headquarters, the Seattle skyline a gray blur through the rain-streaked windows. The press conference room was packed, reporters' cameras flashing, employees whispering in the back. At 36, Daniel's sharp features and navy suit projected confidence, but his hazel eyes betrayed a storm within. He'd spent the last week diving into Innovatech's records, unearthing a trail of negligence, unresolved claims, ignored safety violations, and families like Emma Blake's left in the lurch. The weight of her betrayal, the memory of her tear-streaked face fleeing the last meeting, pressed against his chest. Today, he'd start fixing it, even if it meant risking his carefully guarded anonymity. Clearing his throat, Daniel gripped the podium. "Innovatech has failed too many of its people," he began, his voice steady but laced with conviction. 3 years ago, a man died in our server facility due to preventable errors. His family, and others like them, were denied justice. That ends now." The room hushed, cameras clicking. "I'm launching a full review of past claims, starting with Mark Blake's, to ensure fair compensation. We're also reforming employee benefits to prioritize those who keep this company running." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some skeptical, others hopeful. Daniel's heart pounded. He'd just painted a target on his back for the press, who'd soon dig into his past, the collapse of his real estate empire 5 years ago, when a partner's betrayal cost him everything. But Emma's face, her fierce love for Noah, outweighed his fear. Back in his office, Daniel's thoughts churned. He remembered the sting of that betrayal, how trusting the wrong person had stripped him of his wealth and reputation. He'd rebuilt himself in shadows, buying Innovatech to prove he could do better. But Emma's pain wasn't just a file on his desk. It was personal. She'd trusted him, opened her home, and he'd lied about who he was. The guilt gnawed at him, sharper than any boardroom loss. Late that evening, Daniel sat at his desk, a blank sheet of paper before him. He wrote in careful, slanted handwriting, "This isn't pity. It's what Innovatech owes you." He sealed the note with a check, an anonymous payment to cover Emma's legal fees and a portion of the insurance claim her husband was owed. He'd instructed his assistant to deliver it to her apartment without a return address, a quiet gesture to ease her burden without forcing her to face him. He wanted her to feel safe, not obligated, though he ached to see her again. Across town, Emma sat in her dimly lit apartment, Noah asleep in his bed, the star-carved lamp glowing softly. The envelope had arrived that afternoon, slipped under her door. She tore it open, her hands trembling as she read the note and saw the check. Her green eyes, usually so resilient, filled with tears. The amount was enough to keep her afloat for months, to pay her lawyer, to buy Noah new shoes. But the words, "What Innovatech owes you," felt like a slap. Was this Daniel's way of buying her silence, of easing his guilt as the company's CEO? She crumpled the note, her anger flaring. She'd let him into her life, laughed with him over pizza, watched him carve a star for her son. And he'd hidden the truth, knowing Innovatech was her enemy. Emma paced the small living room, her blonde hair falling loose from its ponytail. She wanted to believe Daniel's kindness was real, that the man who'd played with Noah wasn't the cold executive she'd seen on that stage. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers was shattered. She tucked the check into a drawer, unwilling to use it yet. Her pride, honed by years of scraping by, demanded she confront him. She'd go to Innovatech tomorrow, return the money, and make it clear she wasn't a charity case. As she sat by Noah's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, Emma's heart wrestled with her anger. Daniel's note, though crumpled, lingered in her mind, a faint spark of hope she couldn't quite extinguish, even as she steeled herself for the fight ahead. Emma Blake stood in Innovatech's polished hallway, her blonde ponytail tight, green eyes blazing with resolve. Her janitor's uniform clashed with the glass walls, but she gripped the crumpled envelope with Daniel's check, her heart pounding with anger and nerves. The gray Seattle morning mirrored her mood. She'd walked 3 miles from her apartment to face Daniel King, the CEO who'd lied to her, whose money she refused. Her pride, honed by raising Noah alone, demanded she return it. She knocked on his office door, voice steady. "Daniel, we need to talk." Daniel, 36, looked up, hazel eyes widening. His past, a real estate empire lost 5 years ago to a partner's betrayal, had taught him to trust no one. But Emma's trembling hands and set jaw left him exposed. "Emma," he said, standing. "I didn't—" She cut him off, tossing the envelope onto his desk. "I don't need your pity," she snapped. "You think you can buy my silence because you're the boss. I trusted you." Daniel's face fell, her words a blow. He gestured to a chair, but Emma stood firm, eyes locked on his. "It wasn't pity," he said earnestly. "I hid my identity because I had to. 5 years ago I trusted the wrong person, and my company collapsed. I lost everything. When I bought Innovatech, I kept my name hidden to protect my plans. If the press or employees knew, they'd sabotage me before I could fix anything." He softened. "But you, Emma, and what this company did to you, it made me want to fix it for you." Emma's lips quivered, anger faltering. "You lied," she whispered. "You sat in my home, played with my son, and said nothing." Daniel stepped closer, hands open. "I wanted to tell you, but seeing you with Noah, I saw a life I didn't deserve yet. Not until I made things right." His voice broke. "I love you, Emma. Not because I'm the CEO, but because you showed me a real home." Emma's breath hitched, tears spilling. She turned away, hands covering her face. "I care about you too," she admitted softly. "But I'm scared. I lost Mark. I can't lose Noah or myself to someone who might hurt me again." Her confession hung heavy, her heart bare. Daniel pulled a folded paper from his drawer, a drawing Noah made during their pizza night, a rocket ship with stick figures labeled Mom, Me, and Chudan. He handed it to her, fingers brushing hers. "This boy," he said, "is why I want to be better. For you." Emma stared at the drawing, tears smudging the crayons. His keeping it, like a treasure, cracked her walls. Her eyes searched his. "Words aren't enough," she said, voice steadier. "Show me. Fix what your company broke, for everyone it hurt." Daniel nodded, resolute. "I will." Emma clutched the drawing, heart torn between hope and caution. She paused at the door. "Don't make me regret this," she said, a quiet challenge. Daniel sank into his chair, her words heavy. Emma walked into the Seattle rain, Noah's drawing in her jacket, a fragile thread of trust tying her to the man she'd let into her home. She'd given him a chance, but he'd have to prove it. 4 months later, The Seattle spring brought a soft warmth to the city, sunlight filtering through the budding trees outside Emma Blake's apartment. Innovatech had just unveiled a new policy at a company-wide meeting, one inspired by Emma's struggle. A fund to support employees and their families facing financial hardship, with a special focus on unresolved claims from the past. The announcement, led by Daniel King, had made headlines, with reporters praising the company's shift toward compassion. Emma, now 29, stood in her small living room, her blonde hair catching the light as she read a newspaper article about the changes. Her green eyes, once shadowed by exhaustion, now held a cautious hope. Innovatech had settled her husband's insurance claim, and her lawsuit was behind her, but it was Daniel's actions, not just the money, that had begun to mend her heart. The doorbell rang, and Noah, her 5-year-old son, raced to answer it, his dark curls bouncing. "Uncle Daniel!" he shouted, flinging the door open. Daniel, 36, stood there in a simple sweater, his hazel eyes warm but nervous. In his hand was an envelope, not a legal document, but a letter he'd written himself. "Hey, Noah," he said, ruffling the boy's hair before looking at Emma. "Can we talk?" She nodded, her heart fluttering as she gestured him inside, the familiar scent of coffee and crayons filling the air. Daniel sat at the small table, Noah climbing onto his lap. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice steady, "about proving myself through actions. Innovatech's new policies. They're because of you, Emma. You showed me what matters." He slid the envelope across the table. "This isn't about the company. It's an invitation to join our employee advisory board. Your voice could help others like you." Emma opened the letter, her fingers tracing the words, written in Daniel's careful handwriting. It wasn't just an offer. It was a promise to listen, to value her. Noah, oblivious to the weight of the moment, tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Uncle Daniel, are you going to stay with us forever?" he asked, his brown eyes wide with innocence. Emma's breath caught, her gaze meeting Daniel's. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to imagine a future beyond survival. Daniel's past, his collapse after a partner's betrayal 5 years ago, had made him guarded, but Emma and Noah had cracked that shell, showing him a life worth risking his heart for. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box. He opened it, revealing a tiny paper airplane, the same kind he'd folded for Noah weeks ago, now preserved in lacquer. "I made this for you, Noah," he said, his voice soft, "and I promise to stay if your mom says it's okay." He looked at Emma, his eyes holding a quiet plea. Emma's throat tightened, tears brimming as she saw the care in his gesture, the way he'd kept Noah's joy at the center of everything. She reached for Daniel's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We'll figure it out together," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. Noah grinned, clutching the airplane, and the room seemed to glow warmer, the star-carved lamp casting soft light across the walls. Emma smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The apartment, once a place of struggle, now felt like a home. As they sat together, Noah chattering about his airplane,